Welcome to Donkey Stomp. Today I'm going to dive into a portion of the Department of Defense section within Project 2025. This 922-page manifesto is written almost like a submission for an 8th grader running for class president. I know a lot of us, trust me, you have better things to do than to read this manifesto, but it is important to have an understanding of what's within this. So let's go dive into it. Page 91 is where this section starts. It kind of goes into the vaccine mandates and how that had an effect on, the military and people leaving the military. And, of course, we don't want to stop a pandemic, but, the current administration first go around had no interest in stopping the pandemic, which caused this massive inflation that Biden had to deal with. But I digress. And then they go about the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, not highlighting how Trump actually made the peace agreement with the Taliban and released 1,000 Taliban prisoners back over to them. Okay, they didn't mention that in here, but priorities of this section is reestablish a culture of accountability and transform our armed forces to maximum effectiveness, the borders and financial transparency and accountability. Some of this stuff, hey, we can all agree these are things we all want to achieve. But their methods of achieving them is what's causing the concern. This is one that's really it actually made me chuckle a little bit. This is verbatim here. If Beijing could achieve its goal, it could dramatically undermine America's core interest. Okay? Including by restricting U.S. access to the world's most important market. So they want to have access for U.S. companies to the Chinese economy. Preventing this from happening must be the top priority for American foreign and defense policy. How is defense policy... Well, how does that have anything to do with China opening up their economy? You're going to threaten war with them if they don't open up their economy to U.S. companies? And your current foreign policy does not align with what you're saying in here, but that was pretty comical. Again, 8th grade level stuff, right? Go on, page 93. The U.S. and its allies also face real threats from Russia. We all agree with that, as evidenced by Putin's brutal war in Ukraine. However, these people were 100% behind Putin's puppet. So, goes against what their own interests are right there. But, moving on. And then it talks about modernizing and expanding the U.S. nuclear arsenal. How many warheads do you need? Really? How many is enough? I would say, yes, you need to have that nuclear deterrent, but do you need 5,000 nuclear warheads when, 100 would destroy the Earth? Probably not. So we might not need to spend money on that. Maybe we could modernize our nuclear defense, but do we need the number of nuclear weapons that we still have today? I would argue, no, we don't. We go on to 94, page 94. This is increased Allied conventional defense burden sharing. This goes back to the administration's argument that NATO needs to spend more for its forces, Taiwan, Japan. But those countries, you understand, their goals may not be our goals. Okay, so if we say that we have a goal to box in China or box in Iraq, not Iraq, but Iran, box in Iran and box in China and maybe Russia. Obviously, this administration has zero interest in boxing in Russia. They want to be Russia. Japan might not have the same interest. South Korea might not have the same interest. We can't force these countries to spend more money. We can stop spending money to support the military within those countries, but that's our call. If we do that, then we can't expect them or demand that they make up that money loss with their own spending. It's just not how it works. But again, 8th grade level, they don't quite understand this stuff. You look at this and you wonder, I mean, has any of them ever done any research whatsoever? Do they have any basic level knowledge of how politics work? But it doesn't appear that way when you really go through some of this. Now I want to move down to the Department of Defense Foreign Military Sales section. So a lot of this discussion about NATO countries and Japan and Taiwan spending more to bolster their own military, the thought behind that process is that spending that we're encouraging them to take on is going to be with U.S. companies. Okay, the U.S. military industrial complex is ginormous. All of this foreign military aid to Ukraine, it's not being spent with Mexican companies or companies over in Vietnam. No, these companies benefiting from this military aid to Ukraine are U.S. companies. They're the ones producing all of this military aid that's being sent over to Ukraine, or was being sent. I'm not sure the level of it now. But that's the thought process behind it, that money would be spent inside the U.S. and help really the U.S. economy. But what's happening with our tariff situation is causing these countries to rethink who they're going to be relying on, especially when the U.S. is pulling out of supporting Ukraine and pulling out the military intelligence sharing with Ukraine. There's nice stories out there about this fighter jet out of Sweden that a lot of NATO countries are looking to now instead of buying F-16s from the U.S. And then the more money that they're going to spend inside their own countries, or that they're going to spend to bolster their own military, their own citizens are going to look to say, hey, how can we spend that money at home? So it's not going to come here to the U.S. like it does now. If anything, it's going to move away from it. So it kind of goes against it, trying to emphasize people on page 100 for other countries to buy from the U.S. But with the tariffs and the other policies that this administration is pursuing, it doesn't achieve these goals. These goals here is I understand it, but throughout the entire document, all of these different many areas, they conflict with one another. It's like, who's the editor of Project 2025? I mean, how do you not raise these red flags within your own manifesto? But that's why I'm just going to go through and give you the highlights. I'll just give you the highlights here. So they do want to end informal congressional notification. That's on, page 101. What would be very interesting here is, would they like the next Democratic administration, if we get an election in 2028, whenever the Democrats would win the White House again, do they think that Democratic White House should do the same thing? Or would they do like the Wisconsin legislature, and when the Democrat won the governorship, try to remove all of the approvals that they had for the Republican governor and make it so much more difficult for a Democrat to govern? I would bet you they'll do the latter. They'll try to make, they don't want this to apply to a Democrat. It should only apply to a Republican. Only apply to their like-minded, Americans. And then you go down, they want to go into Department of Defense personnel and recruitment and training. They do have on page 102, every secondary school, so every high school that receives federal funding, which nearly every public school receives federal funding, you will have to take the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. So this is the test that you take to go in and tells you, hey, you can be a, fighter pilot, or you can be a cook. It tells you where you're at and what jobs your aptitude aligns you with. So every student, high school student's going to take this. Maybe not a bad idea to let people know what their options are. I don't necessarily disagree with it, but where's my freedom to not do it, right? I'm paying the freaking federal taxes that you're giving my school. I'm paying those taxes. So you can't I tell you what we want to do. You don't tell me what we need to do. You're taking away my freedoms to not take this test. That's what you're doing. So if you are for freedom, this goes against that. It goes against that. I don't think it's a bad thing for students to take this and have the understanding of options available to them, because there are some very, very good options and careers within the military. But forcing them to do so is not what this country's about. And I also like number 4, that encourage members of Congress to provide time to recruiters during town hall sessions. I mean, considering these Republicans are canceling all their town halls because they're getting, berated at every turn. I mean, this is kind of a weird thing to do too. I mean, how many real, true future recruits are at those town halls? That's kind of stupid to put that in here. But again, remember what I said at the beginning. It's kind of written like an 8th grade submission to run for student council or class president. They don't really think about all this stuff in here. So we want to. We move on to page 103. They want to eliminate Marxist indoctrination, and critical race theory, and abolish diversity, equity, and inclusion from the offices and staff. Who's teaching freaking Marxist theory? No one's teaching, because it's not, it's not let's stomp on every little guy. If it's not that, if it's teaching anything aside from stomping on the little guy, they call it Marxism. So don't buy that stuff, man. It's ridiculous. When has the Republican Party done anything for the working man? Never. Never. But, they want to call that Marxist if you have any kind of thought for the working man that goes against the ultra wealthy. So then we go on to value the military family. So if you're a veteran out there, or you're currently in the military, I want you to look at page 104. And this is the last section I'm going to go over today. Look at page 104. Value the military family. These are some really, really good things. There's 5 points here. Improve housing. You support legislation giving education savings accounts. The improved spouse employment opportunities and protections. Support wages. Let's see how much of these 5 items are fulfilled by this White House administration. I'm going to go out on a limb and say none of this will be achieved. I'm going to say that the Republican Party, if they've done anything over the past 20 years, they've proven that they are not for the military family. They are for the military industrial complex. That's what they're for. The people who can line their pockets for campaigns. They're not for the military family. So I fully support these items on page 104 for the value of the military family. But I guarantee you this current administration will not achieve any of them. Well, I hope you liked this video. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think. And please subscribe and share. Those will help me grow the channel. Come back to the channel and check out the future Project 2025 updates. And for everyone out there watching, don't be afraid to lead the pace and keep stomping.